to do that, and it takes students. So our next speaker is going to be talking about the way and the future for those young leaders in the energy industry to step up. So Dr. Bradley Layton directs the Energy Technology Program at Missoula College, where he and his students investigate solutions to several of society's challenges today in the energy sector. He also holds affiliated appointments in the Climate Change Studies Program and the Biochemistry and Biophysics Program. Layton joined the University of Montana faculty in 2010. His PhD in biomedical engineering and his master's degree in mechanical engineering were earned at the University of Michigan. He also holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. He is the editor for the Institute of Electrical Engineering and Electronics and a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn your attention now to Bradley Layton. Let's give him a warm round of applause here.
Brandon, thanks so much, and gosh, it's really a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. I was invited by Carl in April when I gave a similar talk at the Asia Montana Energy Summit. So these are indeed really exciting times. We're at a place now where Montana is actually signing energy trade agreements with China, and I'm happy to be part of it. So here we go. This is going to be a fairly quick talk. Thank you to the Undersecretary for giving me an extra 5 minutes, but I've got a lot of slides. I want to cover them. I also want to let you know that this talk will be available on YouTube. The program that I direct at the University of Montana is an online program. I have alumni around the country, so we've sort of embraced the 21st century education model, sort of the MOOC, if you will, the massive online open courseware. So this is a part of that. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the big picture on energy sustainability and the evolution of energy flows through societies. So the theme here is themes of 3, and each one of the topics that I'm going to talk about, and I've got 9 total, has 3 main points. So stick with me. There is structure. I'm going to move fast, but again, if you miss it on the first time, it'll be online on YouTube. So I'm going to go through the first 3 laws of thermodynamics. I'm going to talk about how things either get hotter, colder, or do not change. I'll talk about metabolic energy, which is relevant to the agricultural theme of this conference, technological energy, and then joules per capita. How much energy does each one of us use on a daily and yearly basis? I'll show you 3 papers, one that inspired work from me in 2008, and another one I just came across recently that has some pretty big implications. I hope the ideas from that sink in. I'll talk about entropy, information, and money. It's a topic that's 3 topics that are very, that I'm passionate about. Stick with me on those. And then soil sustaining, also a big theme here for agricultural communities. Waste, and then this omega that Schramski 2015 talks about. And then I'll move on to solutions, talking about efficiency, I'll talk about change, and I'll talk about sustainability. That's what those 3 Greek symbols mean. And then I'll talk finally about cooperation, competition versus stagnation. So hopefully each of those 3 themes in the 9 points will stick together somehow. We'll see. Okay, so thermodynamics, there are 3 primary laws. The first one is that energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed. The second one is that on average the universe is becoming more disorderly. And the third one is that you can never hit absolute 0 because heat leaks. Or you can't win, you can't break even, and you can't stop playing. Okay, so that was the first of 9. Now, hotter, colder, or no effect. All of our technologies are going to do one of 3 things, right? They're going to make something hotter, make it colder, or nothing. So, coal-fired power plant, nuclear power plant, internal combustion engine, slash burning, incinerators, greenhouse gases, and nuclear weapons. What do they have in common? They make things hotter. Now, what technology might make something colder? Well, so the fridge does make the air in your room colder, but as I noticed last night in the hotel, every time my fridge would turn on, the AC would then come on shortly thereafter. So they're fighting each other. And in fact, there is no such thing as a technology that fundamentally makes something colder. I'll show you something at the end of the talk, though, that might challenge that hypothesis. Okay, or no effect. I encourage you to look into a concept called Maxwell's demon. It was something that James Clerk Maxwell came up with in the 1850s. The very concept of temperature, what that is, I'm not going to go into detail, but please do look at it. And also the old saying, on average, everything is average. and I'm realizing a lot of things that I do in my career, I'm sort of balancing things and sort of end up either, master of some trades and just a dunce in others. And I think we can all kind of find ourselves in that situation occasionally. And then also that, in general, the universe is always heading towards thermodynamic equilibrium. We cannot avoid that fate. Okay, so the third topic, metabolic energy. If you look on the back of your cereal box, you can see that the USDA suggests that we eat between 2,000 and 2,500 calories per day. That's about 10 megajoules. This is an exercise I have all my students go through the first day of class. If you add up all of the technological energy that we consume each day, that ends up being 500 exajoules per year that civilization extracts from primary energy sources and exhausts as heat into the environment. And I'll get into that, a little more of that later. Now, if we look at the evolution of technology through time, on average, with your 10 megajoules that you eat and your 200 to 120 megajoules that your technology uses, we have essentially 20 to 120 technological slaves working for us 24/7, 365. Big numbers, I know, but I'll show a little more on that later. Okay, metabolic energy, obviously, food. These are the molecular machines that actually run our metabolism. This is what nature came up with over the course of time. The phenomenal thing for me is that all this runs at body temperature. These processes are running right now in our bodies, making us work. Quite complicated and something that I think we could all take a lesson from as we move forward. They get more complicated and more complicated. And oh my gosh, this is some, several doctoral theses involved in, actually what metabolic energy looks like inside an organism. So we still have a lot to learn. Now, technologically, this is what energy systems look like. So we're taking primary energy out of the earth and using it in our technologies. Fairly simple. Coal, oil, and gas, obviously, the major players. Nuclear does as well. So we can take an accounting of what all the different energies are. Biomass at the bottom, coal, oil, natural gas, hydro and wind coming online, but still, fairly modest if you look at the blue curve there, and then, of course, nuclear at the top. I'll show a few other slides like this. Obviously, the world's population is increasing, and we can also see that the world's GDP is increasing. And typically, in order for the quality of life to increase, you want to be able to consume energy, and you want to make money. So those two things tend to go hand in hand in tandem. Okay. Now, as we also move through civilization, we can see that long ago, all we needed were those 10 megajoules or so to feed us, clothe us, keep us warm, et cetera, et cetera. But as civilizations have evolved, you can see that these different sectors come in, complexity sort of rules the day, and our joules per capita increase. So just a few more numbers. I already went over the techno-slaves. That's 10 megajoules per day. The average human on the planet needs 200 megajoules per day to live comfortably. The average North American is at 1,200 megajoules per day, so 6 times the global average, and all of that adds up to the 500 exajoules per year that I just mentioned. Now, we are now currently sitting at 1/10,000th, so 1/10 to the minus 4, 1/10,000th of what's called the Jared Diamond's photosynthetic ceiling. It's also what's currently known as the Kardashev limit, and that's when a civilization uses all of the available energy from its star. Might seem, oh, we got some breathing room, but there's not as much as you might think. Okay, another problem that I give to my students is the first day of class. I say, imagine you put $1 in the bank, or you have a wealthy uncle puts $1 in the bank for you every minute from the minute you're born. And you're going to live to be 100, and so when you're on your 100th birthday, you'll actually be 50 million minutes old. So you'll have $50 million if you live to be 100. Now, but instead of dollars in the bank, let's think of photons into the biosphere. So the sun putting energy into the organic systems that actually power our technologies currently. when do you get to retire if those photons are, are the energy we're using instead of dollars? Well, as it turns out, the sun has been pumping this energy into the biosphere for approximately 3 billion years. We were on schedule to go through all of that 300 billion years worth of energy in 300 years. We started in earnest 150 years ago, so we got about 150 left. Well, so your $50 million, any math majors in the audience? What's the number up top? In minutes. It's 5. So we are at 2.5 minutes into a 5-minute carbon-fueled party halfway till last call. So that's the reality of where we are with our current carbon supplies, and I'll show you that, a little more of that in a second. Now, I mentioned joules per capita. The USA is sort of near the top, not at the top, in terms of how much technological energy we consume per person. You can see Iceland's sort of way out here. They use a lot of energy, but they don't make a whole lot of carbon. A lot of their energy is coming from hydroelectric. They actually import aluminum to sort of purify when they've got extra energy sitting around. So kind of a neat system they have, and I'll show you a few other slides later where there have been a lot of modeling done to see how different states in the United States will diversify their energy portfolios to do something similar to how Iceland has done. Okay, so now into some of the banter that goes around back and forth in academia. So Hill 2006 was looking at the economics of producing biofuels. A lot of times you hear about, taking corn, turning it into ethanol. Maybe it's not so efficient because there's so much energy that goes into it. That intrigued me because I, very naively thought, well, why do we need so much oil and gas, et cetera? Why don't we just turn to the renewables? And it was a big wake-up call for me. I'll talk a little bit about the paper I wrote in 2008 and then finally dig into the details of the 2015 Schramski paper that I mentioned previously. I think we're doing okay on time. We're 4 out of 9. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to read this, but this is the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So this is one of the premier journals in the country, in the world. These are highly peer-reviewed. These aren't just people sort of flying off the handle. These are written by folks that have been thinking about, spent their entire lives thinking about this problem. And for me, I dug in here and said, gosh, that really is a lot of energy per person that we use. How, in fact, can we move away from fossil fuels and towards biofuels? That then led me to write this paper because I really want to understand, why don't we just put up solar panels? Why don't we just put up wind? And my initial intent here was to write something that you might find, at the checkout counter next to the Inquirer or the Cosmo or whatever. I didn't succeed. As soon as you start hearing, quadrillion and exajoules, et cetera, most people's eyes sort of roll back in their head. But if you do take a look at this paper, which I encourage you to do, I tried to give some graphical representations in terms of, what would it take if instead of, driving cars, we all rode bicycles? What would it take if we just replaced all of our fossil fuels with solar panels? So hopefully, if you take some time to read this, you'll sort of get the bigger picture that I started to get when I first started writing this in 2004. Okay, now, there's a field within the American Society of Mechanical Engineering called thermoeconomics. Kind of two weird, things to put together, but a lot of times it's engineers trying to look to how to make power plants more efficient, right? So how do you get more out of less? How do because most of the power plants we use, as I mentioned previously, are thermal power plants. They're making things hotter. But how do you save money and not make things as hot? So I took a bigger perspective, and thank you, Undersecretary Salerno, for mentioning this. It was a pretty big wake-up call for me to realize, gosh, we really are spending a lot of money defending oil wells around the country. So 1.5 trillion barrels of oil remain on the planet. If you take that at $100 a barrel, that's $150 trillion. 10% of it is in Iraq. That's $15 trillion. There's global GDP, at least it was when I wrote this, and there's our national debt as it was previously as well. Now, if you start looking at the actual thermoeconomics, this is what I was listening to the radio, hearing what the United States was sued for when we would accidentally kill an Iraqi civilian. If you were to make a similar estimate for a U.S. soldier at $100,000 a year for 80 years. That's an $8 million man, if you will, or woman. So you do the math here, and as it turns out, the economics actually play out pretty well. It's a 7-to-1 payback ratio, spending U.S. dollars and lives to protect those oil fields. So from a purely economic standpoint, it might make sense if, in fact, that was the motivation for invading Iraq. Okay, so Schramski, 2015, really takes also a really big view on the amount of energy that's reached the planet Earth since photosynthesis started. He looks not only at biomass that is here on the planet right now, but all the biomass that's stored underground in natural gas, coal, and oil. So he models the Earth as a big battery and says that humankind, more or less, is a drain on that battery. Okay, and so he's got a picture here stating that 19 zetajoules, so zeta is 3 orders of magnitude higher than exa, which I just mentioned, so 1,000 times greater. 19 zetajoules represents the current chemical potential energy stored in the form of living biomass. That's stuff that's just, forests, algae, plants, what have you, anything that grows and collects energy from the sun. 19 zetajoules. Now, 2 zetajoules is the rate at which nature replaces that. So that's sort of your annual, nature's annual income, 2 zetajoules to replace that 19. So you can imagine if you've got $100 in the bank, you're putting $10 in. That's the ratio there. So 2 zetajoules per year, adding to that 19 zetajoules of standing, we can then take a look, starting at year 0, 2,000 years ago, if you will, up to now. This is the rate of depletion. That is not a happy curve to me. If one were to model that mathematically, it is tanking. There's no question whatsoever. So we've got some fairly serious things to consider, and I also am optimistic that now that we're aware of this, that we can start to flatten that curve out and maintain the biomass that remains on the planet. And just another graphic here of what 500 exajoules, that's our global civilization budget, compared to that 2 zetajoules that's currently on the planet. So we're consuming approximately 25% of what's currently coming in photosynthetically each year. Okay. I've had the pleasure of corresponding with Jared Diamond. When I first started publishing this, I learned that academia can be just as political as politics. I sent this paper off to a couple of journals. You'll never get anything published there. I did finally get it published, though, in International Journal of Green Energy, the one I just showed you previously. And if you get a chance, I also encourage you to read Jared Diamond, because he does point to a lot of societies that were able to avoid collapse, Japan being one, taking a very strict policy on their forests in comparison to, say, something like Easter Island, which you see behind me, or Haiti, which has decimated their forests. Okay, so back to Schramski. This is the total energy consumption. This is actually listed in terawatts. So imagine a 16 trillion watt light bulb burning 24/7, 365. That's the rate at which we consume energy on this planet as humans. There's the population. The green line, though, is the most interesting. That's that joules per person that I mentioned previously. And if you look really carefully, you can see that it's actually bending down a little bit. One of two causes for that. Either we're becoming more energy efficient, that would be the good news, or we're becoming poorer, sort of back to that GDP, and we would sort of hope for the former. So, and I think that's another theme that frequently gets lost in these discussions, is that energy efficiency is actually a preferable technology to some of the other energy technologies that we've been discussing over the course of the conference. Okay, so back to Schramski. He has put up a little equation, as academics tend to do. I won't go through all the details, but I will show you a couple curves. Now, these are not that easy to understand at first, but if you take a look, again, going back to that year 0, the 70,000, this is actually in years, and he's selected the symbol omega somewhat ominously, sort of the end of bioenergy on the planet as we know it. But 2,000 years ago, we had 65,000 years left of bioenergy at that rate of consumption. Scroll forward to 1,000 years ago, and we still have, well, 25,000. What's the flat line there? Well, that's the plague. When there aren't as many people around to demand as much energy, that tends to flatten out. Now, if you zoom in, you can see now where we are. At our current rate of consumption, we have 1,000 years left. Again, that curve is not that encouraging, but if you look, really our goal now, and that's the goal of all of us, is to take this curve, flatten it out, and as Undersecretary said, start to turn that curve around. All right, now, bear with me on this. I don't expect you to get it on the first time. It's something that I've been thinking about for years. But what I've really tried to do is take a big picture on entropy. That's the second law that I mentioned previously. Information, we deal with it all the time. We've got it on our memory sticks when we're talking, when we're using our GPSs, et cetera, et cetera. It's all around us. We can measure things, and that's basically what information is. And also money. And obviously we're just speaking of that in terms of the reap opportunities around there. So it's, in my mind, it's really those three things that we're always balancing. How do you reduce the amount of entropy or disorder that your technology is causing? How do you know what's going on? And even with the solar panel example a second here ago, the ranch hand doesn't have to drive out there because he can pull up his app and say, okay, the solar panels are working and they're pumping water for me or what have you. So that's the role of information. And then obviously money. Getting the capital together right now so that we can move forward and diminish the amount of entropy we create by having good control of our information. And in any system, again, positive, minus, or zero, you can plot each of those three on three separate independent axes. And obviously, we would all like to be wealthier, share more, and actually have better order. So sort of sitting at the bottom of that bowl, sort of like close to us would be the optimal in my mind. Okay, and as time moves forward, each one of these variables changes for different systems as well. Now, what I've come up with is my own little version of a sustainability coefficient, and basically saying that if we have sufficient access to information, we will be able to reduce the amount of disorder, entropy, destruction to the environment. So again, I encourage you to take a look at some of the work I've done. We can also see that for different societies. So if you look at indigenous populations, they were sort of living closer to nature, not causing as much disorder. If you look at some of the technologies that are current in Denmark, they're typically able to diminish their own entropy, keep themselves order without shedding that much to the environment. Haiti, I already mentioned previously, has big problems with deforestation, big problems with solar loss. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from Prigogine here. Now, also, we've heard a lot lately about the wealth-income gap. A lot of times, I think of that as more of an information gap. Insider trading, who knows who, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, I think the Pope might have weighed in on this a little bit too. But I think as we move forward as a global civilization, the better access all of us have to information, the better we'll do at closing that income or access to financial resources gap. That's my hope as well. And there's my own little sustainable economic coefficient. I used alpha for the information entropy relationship, and I'm using beta now as the information money relationship. I haven't worked out the details, but it's kind of some broad strokes on what I think we might be able to do to move forward. Now, there's also, on the backside of information, there's also misinformation. I think we're all pretty well aware of some of the things that were going on prior to the invasion of Iraq. There was a lot of distrust going around, and rightly so. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is sustainability. So this being an agricultural conference, I think we're all concerned about soil sustainability. I think we also should be more concerned about the amount of soil that we actually get rid of. I'm at the University of Montana, and I'm just astonished. I walk by this dumpster, and I see topsoil in the dumpster going to the landfill. And you know, in my mind, knowing what we know about the value of soil, I've got a bag of biochar here in my pocket that I'm looking forward to putting on my garden and my house plants when I get home. It's just astonishing and, you know, frankly atrocious that we'd actually put dirt, you know, burn hydrocarbons in a dump truck, drive them across town, and put them in a landfill. In fact, I think it's great news that starting next year, 7 states are actually going to outlaw putting any kind of organic waste into landfills from restaurants and food distributors, et cetera. And then the chair, I don't know, looks like a great chair, but looks like the end of the chair, if you will, and that's why I put the omega there for that poor chair too. All right, so, and I am not an expert on this, I'll leave that to some of the other speakers, but I've just put a few images up there in terms of how we have not been good stewards in terms of sustaining our soils. How we have not done a good job handling our waste. These are just, you know, literally plastic oceans floating out there. And I was putting these slides together last night, and it was one of those, you know, like these images were coming up to me when I was, you know, kind of Googling around, and I was afraid I was going to be able to finish putting the talk together because it was like a train wreck. You just, you know, start watching these things like, how is this actually happening on planet Earth? So I'm working with some fellow Missoulians to see if we can't take the entire city of Missoula off the landfill. There are other cities around the country doing exactly that, sort of going landfill free, if you will, triaging things, and I'll show you a model for that shortly. Now, getting back to the omega and getting back to the first law of thermodynamics, every single atom or molecule or what have you is going to have some fate. It's here now, it's going to be somewhere else tomorrow, and I've tried to simplify it in terms of what the fate of those molecules will be. So you've got wood, naturally occurring products, or naturally occurring materials. Synthetics, these are things that we use like the plastics and metals, et cetera, that I just showed you. And then organic materials, this is sort of the food waste that I just mentioned a second ago. Well, in my mind, they're either going to go up, down, or stay right there where they are. Again, that theme of 3 that I was talking about before. So with my organics, I bury them, I compost them. With my synthetics, I recycle them, hoping that they'll end up back in the manufacturing stream. And with woody biomass, woody biomass is a direct competitor with conventional or fossil fuels, if you will, and I think the appropriate thing to do is burn them and use them for energy. On the economic side of things, you've kind of got three options. You can either bank them for when the value of that commodity goes up. You can barter, trade, there's no money involved whatsoever, or buy or sell, depending on what the market looks like for any commodity. That's about as simple as I could get it. Now, moving on to solutions. So the first one, as I mentioned previously, is efficiency. It's not typically mentioned, but it really is the first step. It's that Schramski curve, that green curve that's sort of flattened out where we need to go rather than into a model of poverty. And obviously that's going to require change. How do we change our current technologies to move on to a renewable future? And then sustainability, that alpha coefficient that I mentioned previously as well. So pretty simple. Efficiency, there's a man putting some insulation in an attic so he doesn't have the highest heating bill and doesn't burn as much natural gas in his home. There's a Prius, many more miles per gallon. At the top, I'm showing a power factor. That's some research that I'm doing for a firm to try to make the industrial manufacturing plant more efficient. And then at the bottom, you can see Schramski's 3 curves, and hopefully that's where we're headed, towards a more efficient future rather than a more impoverished future. Okay, and I had the pleasure not too long ago of traveling with Brad Rubenstein. I'm not sure if you heard his name or not, but he's doing some Broadway plays with the gentleman who was in Star Trek a few years ago, so quite a hoot. And as an energy technologist, I bump into people all the time, like, oh, haven't you heard of this? You should check this out. He showed me this little website. It's called thesolutionproject.org, and what they've done is sort of put together an optimal renewable energy profile, if you will, for all 50 states. You just kind of click on it. I clicked on Montana last night, and so What they're showing here is that residential PV, most appropriately, and again with the National Center of Appropriate Technology, I think it's a good way to go. Most appropriately would be to have about 3% of Montana's energy profile be residential photovoltaics. 2% on commercial and governmental. Big plant photovoltaics, so the big solar farms that you see, 22%. Waves, not so much in Montana. CSP, so this is going to be concentrated solar power. So you use the sun's heat to actually make steam, just like you would in a coal-fired power plant or a nuclear power plant, to make electricity, of course. Geothermal energy, either for heating or in some cases, if you have a high enough thermal gradient, to make electricity. Onshore wind, obviously fantastic resources for that in Montana. Hydro, we already have a great portfolio there. Offshore wind and tidal, not so much again, but that's more appropriate for other states. Other solutions, this is just my own personal quest. I have a utility bicycle that I've used to collect leaves from my neighbors. These otherwise were going to go in the landfill because they're in the plastic bags, not sort of set up by the curb for eco-compost to get. So took a personal challenge upon myself, built a little trailer, went around, collected them. Now these leaves are being turned into soil in my yard. I even went to the trouble of pulling this lonely log out of the river just for decoration and just kind of fun, just something to do with my bicycle. Well, anyway, then I've got a shot of me. Yeah, I was pedaling this thing. My logger friend, who I'll show you a picture of here in a little bit, just like literally fell on the floor when he saw this because, of course, he's operating the giant trucks. Like, what the heck's going on with the log? But anyway, there it is. That's Missoula. That's keeping it weird. So Craig Thomas, I just mentioned, that's a shot of him there in the lower right. He's done a fantastic job in the state of Montana doing proper forest management, restoring elk habitat, reducing forest fire risks, and maintaining soil quality in an appropriate manner. The device that you see here on the left, I'm going to discuss that a little bit with Undersecretary Salerno. What they've done is come up with a way to harvest this otherwise hazardous fuel that we all had to breathe all summer, take that out of the woods, and use it as a biofilter. Use it as a way to take the particulates and a lot of the CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's biologically charged, just like the biochar that I think you're going to see in the back of the room here. There are organisms in there that actually metabolize, and I showed you all the weird metabolism previously. We cannot currently engineer that, so we're using the microorganisms to our benefit to process those wastes for us. And then we're going to set this up at a new greenhouse down in Corvallis. A colleague of mine, Brian Jackson, in fact, on Friday, we're going to move our Biomax, 25 kilowatt Biomax downdraft gasifier there to make heat, electricity, and CO2 for their greenhouse. So there's a solution. Algae Aquatech, I think they're here as well. They had the misfortune of their power plant exploding last year. Any new technology is going through growth pains. We've seen that with SpaceX as well. They're rebuilding it now. The plan is to have it up and running by the end of this year. So excited to work with them as well on their initiatives. And in fact, they've designed this to actually make electricity and heat while taking carbon out of the atmosphere. That's the key to moving forward. Craig Thomas, who I mentioned previously, has spent the last 5 years designing, scaling his system up so that you actually could take the stack away from a coal-fired power plant, send that effluent into a larger scale of the biofilter I just sent you, and basically take that CO2 right out of the air. That's another solution, or another change, the little delta that you see in the upper corner. With my own students, we built solar cars. We had the good fortune of traveling down to Houston. We took this car and raced it in Houston with Shell's help. And so I have to, hats off to Shell for actually looking towards the future, away from fossil fuels. Here's another solution. We talked about wind turbines, windmills in Montana. What do you do when the wind's blowing and the lights aren't on? Well, you got to put it somewhere. Battery technology is great, but this is a way to just use a simulated hydroelectric facility. This is an 800 megawatt facility that's going in. In fact, Carl Lundquist from Absaraka Engineering is going to be here tomorrow to talk more about it. 800 megawatts of storage, that's pushing what California has planned at 1.3 gigawatts. And this is how you can actually put a wind farm in and have a big pile of water, if you will, instead of a big pile of coal as your energy security. Okay, and then back to the sustainability. This paper I just wrote, it's gonna come out here in a month or two, and I've talked already about my two sustainability coefficients, the alpha and the beta. We'll see if anything comes with it, comes from it. It went under a peer review, but then it's gonna sit out there in the literature and get beaten up a bunch, just like most academic papers do. But that's also something to look forward to. This paper, I will warn you, is not as approachable as the 2008 paper that I just mentioned, but I had a lot of fun writing it, and I'm really thankful for the International Journal of Design and Nature and Ecodynamics for helping me get it published. Okay, so now that I've got your attention, I just want to show you just one more slide on this whole alpha thing that I was just mentioning. So this is the second law of thermodynamics, and the little dot over the delta S at the top says that entropy is always changing as a function of how much heat is flowing through something. So the delta Q is the rate at which heat flows through any technology. And as we saw previously, heat flows through every technology, in fact, every organism. So the faster that flows through and the colder it is, the more entropy your system makes. Now, the calculation I did shows that the universe is making entropy at a rate of 2.34 times 10 to the 23rd watts per degree Kelvin per cubic meter. That's the background entropy rate. When you sit down and take that 500 exajoules per year, divide that by the volume of the atmosphere, what you come up with is that humans are entropicizing planet Earth at a rate 10 to the 23rd times greater than the universal background rate. Now, you can call that a good thing, you can call that a bad thing. I don't know yet. It's just a number that I came up with. Most people don't spend much time thinking about entropy. That's one thing that's afforded to us in academia, is that we get to do things like this. So what this means, where it goes, I'm not sure, but it's something that I just put out there in the literature. Okay. Another sustainability. I mentioned that the most appropriate thing to do with biomass, and in fact in some cases plastics, which of course are just really old biomass that have been transformed through technology, is to take them and turn them into heat or electricity. So I've been working with Patrick Brown at International Biomass to help ramp up his production, which takes 9 parts wood, 1 part plastic, and turn that into energy. So he's currently doing this with EPA approval in Wisconsin and hoping to build a plant here in Helena as well. And I've done the math for him at the rate he's moving. If we were to take all of the waste plastic in Montana, we could actually supply Patrick Brown with his raw materials rather than forcing him to import it from California. Right now, a lot of the plastics go to California, actually get shipped to Asia. So we could use that waste as a local energy and economic resource. Okay, so 7 out of 9 done. So the next little set of 3 things that I want to talk about are more sort of the policy side of things. So I've spent a lot of time up to now talking about the problems, sort of looking backwards. Now I want to look sort of right now, where we are in terms of policy. So previously, if you remember, we had this thing during the Reagan administration called Star Wars. It was sort of, came out of the Cold War, if you will. It was just, distrust among nations. I'm really hoping that is behind us. I'm hoping that whatever we've negotiated with Iran right now is going to pay off and actually show some fruition. I'm hoping now that as a global civilization, we're sort of beyond these conflicts, and that now we're sort of at war with the climate in some ways, and it's pretty hard to argue with Mother Nature. Usually, man loses that battle. So just a few shots of what competition looks like. This is financial competition. I read this book just prior to publishing the 2008 paper. Pretty good read if you want sort of a deeper look into some of the policies that led us where we are currently in terms of our so-called petrodollar warfare between the dollar, which was on the oil standard, and the euro, which is where Saddam Hussein decided he was going to start selling his oil in 2000. Okay, I don't have too many great images on this, but stagnation is just sort of doing nothing. You know, rather than fighting over things, you can sort of, you know, throw your hands up and sit around and do nothing. I don't think that's an option. I don't think anyone would think that to be an option. Instead, cooperation is a better option. Here's a shot of two prominent leaders, at least on the surface, cooperating. And I've got a quote here in a little bit that I'll share with you on that little exchange. If you get a chance to, take a look at this book by a friend of mine, Russ Gennett, who wrote Humanity, the chimpanzees who would become ants. He sort of likens our species to one that became sort of isolated tree dwellers to this now global civilization that really has to look to the future for solutions. I also had the privilege of meeting Elizabeth Colbert not too long ago, and so just read this. In fact, I just read this myself last night before preparing the talk. I think she posted it 4 days ago. Whether this is true, I'm not sure, but you can sort of see how the politics and the policies can have some twists and some ironies to them. We'll see where that actually heads. And here's just a shot of Russ Gennett, the author of Chimpanzees, the chimpanzees who would become ants. Also, if you get a chance, I suggest reading Amory Lovins. He's been a renewable energy sustainability guy since the 70s and 80s and all that, and didn't get a whole lot of press until recently, but now has been approached by the Pentagon. How do we actually have energy security and prosperity, et cetera, et cetera. So take a look at his book, Reinventing Fire, for some inspiration on that. Okay, I have not read this paper yet, but this just came out as well, and I think if we were to take a look towards the solutions presented in it, you can see that some of the things proposed in here are probably very similar to the technologies being developed at Algae Aqua Technologies. And another one, this is another technology that actually sort of pulls off that Homer Simpson slide that I mentioned previously, where a photon comes in at a high frequency, something that would otherwise strike the planet, turn into heat, and then perhaps not be re-radiated because of the greenhouse effect. This technology actually brings a photon in, shoots a photon back out at a frequency that penetrates the CO2 in the atmosphere, and on the backside has an air conditioner, more or less. Doesn't violate the first law, doesn't violate the second law, and is actually on a bench top somewhere in California right now. And here's just a couple other details. So it's a little bit like a solar panel, but it's like a solar cooling panel, if you will. It's not making electricity. Well, there are electrons flowing, but it's firing photons back into space and keeping cooler air behind it. All right, well, that's 8. And then finally, conclusions. Just to sum up, I think I've shown you a lot of the problems that we currently face. I think I've shown you a few things in terms of policy that we're making right now, and hopefully that I've shown you some of the changes that I think are occurring so we can have some progress in the future. So with that, I want to thank the National Science Foundation for several grants they've granted me over the years. Of course, the University of Montana, the Department of Labor has also funded some of my work, NASA, as well as the Perkins Foundation. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take any questions. That was kind of fast, as promised. I did record it, so it's out there if you want to.
And you also said it's going to be available on YouTube, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So I use a software to record that, and it'll be out on YouTube as well. Yeah.
Very good. How about one more round of applause for We covered a lot of ground in 45 minutes, and as luck would have it, he's actually agreed to stick around, and of course you can ask him questions in the coffee break that's coming up, but there's also a part of tomorrow's program around mid-afternoon where a topic gets to be chosen by conference participants, and Mr. Layton has agreed to stick around and be part of that part of Harvesting Clean Energy Conference. And my friend, you covered a lot of ground in 45 minutes, but I'll tell you this, my ears picked up on one of my favorite quotes out of his 45-minute address, keeping it weird. Love it, especially from a guy with roots back to Montana State University. So can't wait to get back on the stage. With that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. We have a nice coffee break right outside the conference room here. Generously sponsored by Sage Creek